Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. You look sad, sir. Would you like to meet my mother? Millionaire CEO is surprised. Ethan Miller was one of the most influential men in the country. The visionary CEO of Miller Tech Corporation, a publicly traded high-tech company, he had transformed a garage startup into a global giant. Every decision he made shook Wall Street. The media called him the digital king, the messiah of American innovation. He lectured at the most prestigious universities, his words were quoted in business journals, and young entrepreneurs dreamed of following in his footsteps. Always impeccable in his Italian suits, surrounded by advisors and cameras, Ethan embodied success, discipline, and quiet power. Yet no one saw the man behind the symbol. Behind the tinted windows of his limousines and the lights of the TV studios, he lived a cold, silent solitude. His phone never rang for anything but business. He no longer had family dinners, no arms to rest in, no soft voice to remind him that he was simply a man, not a public figure. His wife, Rachel, had died 3 years earlier of a fulminating cancer. They'd never had children, too absorbed in growing the business, always saying, later. That later never came. Since then, Ethan had been surviving rather than living. His sprawling Manhattan skyscraper apartment, luxurious as it was, reminded him every night that he no longer had anyone to tell about his day. The evenings were the hardest. When he took off his expensive watch and placed his tie on the leather armchair, all that remained was a drained man, searching for something he could no longer name. That Saturday in the fall, a gala was held in his honor at a 5-star hotel. It celebrated his latest acquisition, a European artificial intelligence company. Politicians, celebrities, and journalists gathered to congratulate him. But Ethan didn't go. He put on a simple wool jacket and sneakers he hadn't worn in years, and went out for a walk, alone. Without a driver, without an escort. He crossed several neighborhoods aimlessly, as if he were trying to get away from himself. He didn't really know what he was looking for, but he knew he didn't want to be congratulated. Not tonight. After more than an hour of walking, he arrived in a working-class neighborhood of Brooklyn. There, the buildings were older, the streets less polished, but life seemed more real. The voices of locals echoed, children's laughter drifted from the parks, and the smell of food wafted from the small local shops. He entered a small park. Yellowing leaves were slowly falling from the trees. The wind was cool, but not icy. He sat down on a wooden bench, leaning slightly forward, and stood still, staring into space, his elbows resting on his knees. At that moment, the charismatic CEO disappeared, replaced by a tired man, worn down by emotional emptiness. He didn't immediately notice the small figure approaching. "You look sad, sir." The voice was soft, almost sing-song. Ethan looked up, surprised, almost disoriented. Before him, a little girl stood straight, her hands in the pockets of her oversized sweater. She was 10 years old at most. Her face was a mixture of innocence and precocious maturity. Her black, curly hair was neatly tied back, despite a few stray strands. Her sneakers were worn but clean. There was a bright, genuine light in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a very long time. "My name is Lucy Johnson. Are you sad?" His question was direct, without judgment, without embarrassment. Just an honest observation. Ethan blinked, taken aback. No adult would ever have asked him that question. He answered almost without thinking. "Yes, a little." Lucy moved a little closer, still serious but kind. "My mom says that when you're sad, it's because you need a little kindness. She's very kind, my mom. Do you want to meet her?" Ethan remained silent for a moment, taken aback. He had received invitations to dinner at Michelin-starred restaurants, economic summits, and private rooms reserved for the elite. But never had he received such a simple, pure, and selfless proposal. He felt something crack inside him. An emotion rose up, brutal, foreign, tenderness. He gave a small laugh, halfway between surprise and gratitude. All right. And at that precise moment, without knowing it, Ethan had just made the most important choice of his life. The next day, true to his word, Ethan returned to the small park. It was a quiet Sunday morning, bathed in golden light that pierced through the reddened autumn leaves. He wore the same simple jacket as the day before, his hands in his pockets, a little nervous despite himself. He didn't really know what he was doing there, what he was hoping for, but one thing was certain, that little girl's smile had left a deeper impression on him than he cared to admit. Lucy was waiting for him, sitting on the same bench, her legs gently dangling in the air. When she saw him, she stood up enthusiastically and beckoned him to follow her. "Mom made some soup. She says it cures everything. Even tired hearts." Ethan smiled softly, touched by her spontaneity. He followed the girl through the quiet streets of the neighborhood. They walked past houses with peeling shutters, past an old gentleman who greeted everyone who passed by, and past a grocery store whose owner gave them a familiar wink. There was a simplicity of life there that Ethan's world no longer knew. They arrived in front of a small red brick building, its facade showing the marks of time. Lucy climbed the steps lightly, as if she were climbing into a castle. She opened the apartment door with pride. "It's here." Ethan walked in and was immediately struck by the warmth of the place. Not the physical warmth, but the warmth that emanated from a living home. The walls were covered with children's drawings, some signed "Lucy" with clumsy hearts. A shelf overflowed with used books. On the table, a vase held flowers picked, no doubt, from a corner of the sidewalk. And in the air hung a comforting scent of vegetable soup, flavored with thyme and roasted garlic. That's when he saw her. Sarah Johnson, Lucy's mother, stood in the doorway of the small, open-plan kitchen. She wore a simple dress and a flowery apron. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, and her face, though marked by fatigue, radiated a quiet sweetness. She wiped her hands on a dishcloth and approached with a sincere smile. "Lucy told me about you. Come in, sit down. We love guests here." Her voice was calm, warm, without a hint of concern or judgment. Ethan, accustomed to calculating glances, strategic conversations, and self-serving flattery, was deeply disarmed by this simplicity. He nodded, a little awkwardly, and sat down on a wooden chair near the table. As Sarah poured 3 steaming bowls, Lucy launched into an enthusiastic account of her day. She talked about her school, her science teacher, and the stray cat she wanted to tame. Ethan listened, fascinated by the liveliness of her wit and the tenderness of this life he would never have guessed about walking down the street. Sarah, for her part, gazed at her daughter with pride. Between bites, she exchanged a few words with Ethan, never trying to find out too much about him. She knew nothing about his wealth, his status, or his full name. And that calmed Ethan more than he would have thought. He learned that she worked as a nurse at a community clinic, worked night shifts, and was raising Lucy alone since her construction worker husband had died in a construction site accident 4 years earlier. She didn't complain. She recounted it with a gentle strength, a quiet resilience. "We don't choose what life takes from us, but we can choose what we give to others," she said at one point, serving her daughter some more bread. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The sentence, spoken without pretension, struck him like a painful reminder of what he had lost, or perhaps never had. It was the beginning of an unexpected friendship. He came back the following Sundays. Always at the same time. Always in the same simple attire. Sometimes he brought a dessert from a local bakery, other times a book for Lucy. But most often, he came simply to be there, to breathe in what he had never found in the gilded salons of Manhattan: human warmth, authenticity, unconditional love. Sarah didn't ask questions. She let him chop vegetables beside her, taste her soups, or read aloud while Lucy did her homework. Ethan was laughing again. Really. Not for the cameras, not for the shareholders. He was laughing, a belly laugh that cleansed the sadness that had been lodged inside him for years. And little by little, the big CEO with empty eyes rediscovered something he thought was dead, the feeling of existing for something other than power. One Saturday night, as the sky over Brooklyn turned a deep blue, Lucy sat on the living room rug. She was doodling a picture of a superhero, a man in a gray jacket and glasses who saved people not with brawn, but with ideas. On the wall, a television was playing in the background. It wasn't a cartoon, but a business show on a major national network. Tonight, in the Titans of Innovation, focus on the man behind Miller Tech, Ethan Miller, the quiet entrepreneur turned tech mogul, whose decisions influence global markets. Lucy raised her head, curious. The screen showed a familiar figure. First from behind, then in the middle of a conference, standing in front of a crowd of journalists, wearing a dark suit. Then a close-up of his face, serious, focused. She blinked. Slowly putting down her pencils, she moved closer to the television. Her mouth fell open. "It's him," she whispered, petrified. She jumped to her feet and ran to the kitchen where her mother was preparing dinner. "Mom! Come quickly. It's him. It's Mr. Ethan. He's a CEO. A real one. He was on TV." Sarah, confused, wiped her hands on a cloth and followed her, frowning. Entering the living room, she saw Ethan on the screen, sitting in a studio, calmly answering a reporter's questions about corporate social responsibility. She stood there frozen. Her heart raced. Everything overlapped, her quiet Sundays, the bowls of soup, the board games, the shared silences. Ethan's gaze, always so discreet. His humility. And now, this image. This contrast. This man wasn't just a solitary passerby. He was a financial giant. A global player. A heavy silence filled the room. Sarah sat down gently on the edge of the sofa, stunned. She felt betrayed, but not really. More like, unsettled. She tried to understand. "He never told us anything." Lucy approached her mother, confused. "Do you think he didn't want to lie to us, but just be normal?" Sarah placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder, not answering. She had so many questions. Why had he hidden his identity from them? Had he been ashamed of them? Was he playing a role? Or was he simply looking for a place where he could be just Ethan, without his name on a business card? The next day, when Ethan knocked softly on the door, he felt the air change. He stepped inside and immediately saw the different looks. Less spontaneous. A little distant. Lucy kissed him, but not as quickly. Sarah greeted him, politely, but with a restraint he'd never felt before. He understood immediately. He had been discovered. He sat down at the table, his hands crossed, and made no attempt to flee. "You saw me, didn't you?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Last night. On television. I saw you, standing in front of the cameras, with that tone, that look. It was like seeing a stranger." A silence fell. Ethan let it last. He looked up at her, sincere. "What you saw yesterday, that's only part of me. The costume, the speeches, the power, that's what I do, not who I am." He paused. Lucy listened to him, her eyes wide open. "Here, with you too. I was myself. For the first time in years. No one looked at me for my wealth. No one wanted anything from me. You offered me your trust, your kindness, your home, without asking for anything." Sarah stared at him, confused. "You could have told us." "I know. But I was scared. Scared that everything would change if I did. Here, I was Ethan. Just Ethan. Not Mr. Miller, not the CEO. And you made me human again, Sarah. You, Lucy, you taught me to smile again." His gaze fell on the little girl, moved. Lucy smiled shyly. Sarah sighed. Emotion overwhelmed her. She stood up, walked to the window, and watched the trees dance in the October wind. "You didn't come here to study us or offer us crumbs of your fortune." "No. I came because I was lost. And you guided me to something true." She finally turned around, her eyes shining. So stay. But this time, be completely you. Even with your name. Even with your truth. Because here, it's not your bank account we respect. It's your heart. Ethan smiled, relieved. And for the first time, he felt accepted. Fully. Humanly. Shortly after this shocking revelation, Ethan made a radical decision. He convened his board of directors in a glass-enclosed meeting room on the 56th floor of Miller Tech headquarters. This time, he wasn't cold or distant. He spoke from the heart. He announced that he would be partially stepping back from executive leadership to devote himself to a new cause, giving back to those too often forgotten. I will invest part of my personal fortune in something much bigger than digital innovation, human hope. A few weeks later, the Lucy Foundation was born, named in honor of the little girl who, with an innocent question, had lit up her life. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful: to support single mothers, provide free healthcare, create community centers in underserved neighborhoods, and develop educational spaces where every child could dream again. Ethan refused to let his name be listed first. It was Lucy, not him, who symbolized innocence and courage. The logo, designed by Lucy herself, depicted a child's hand reaching out toward a larger one, framed by a discreet heart. Sarah, for her part, quit her job at the clinic. She hesitated, out of humility, but Ethan looked her straight in the eye. I need someone who understands suffering without judging it. Someone real. You are that person, Sarah. She accepted. Not for the money or the prestige, but because she felt this mission was bigger than any of them. She took over the first Lucy Community Center, opened in the very neighborhood where she had raised her daughter. It was a former abandoned school, transformed into a vibrant living space, a free clinic, a daycare, a library, and training workshops for struggling mothers. The gray streets of Brooklyn lit up. Residents flocked. Their gazes changed. And Lucy was growing up. At just 11 years old, she became the voice of the foundation. She inaugurated each new center with a simple but moving speech. She never read from paper, she spoke from the heart. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just saw a sad man on a bench, and I asked him to meet my mom. I think sometimes that's all it takes to change a life. The cameras loved her. People cried. But for Ethan, every word from Lucy was a silent confirmation: he had made the right choice. 10 years passed. Lucy had grown into a bright young woman with a frank gaze and strong convictions. She had studied social sciences at Columbia, then returned to her neighborhood, true to her roots. That day, spring sunshine bathed the streets of New York. A crowd had gathered in front of a brand new building, with its soft, open architecture. A large banner fluttered in the wind. Sarah Johnson Community College, for the children of possibility. This project, 100% funded by the Lucy Foundation, aimed to make higher education accessible to young people from disadvantaged neighborhoods, with human, psychological, and material support. Lucy stepped onto the stage, wearing a simple dress. She smiled at the crowd, then at her mother, who was sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. Beside her, Ethan, his hair now graying and his gaze soft, stared at the stage, moved. Lucy spoke. When I was little, I simply asked a sad man if he wanted to meet my mother. I didn't know he was rich. I didn't know he was powerful. I just knew he needed tenderness. Today, that man has become a mentor, a pillar. He taught me that you can turn a wound into a bridge. And that money, without a heart, is an empty cage. A silence, then sincere applause. Sarah, moved, squeezed Ethan's hand. She had never wanted to be a hero. But this university bore her name. And what they had built together, far from traditional codes, was stronger than a marriage or a contract. It was a family of chosen souls. Ethan looked at Lucy, then Sarah, and whispered. It all started with this simple sentence: "You look sad, sir." Sarah finished for him, her voice trembling but firm. "Do you want to meet my mother?" They smiled at each other. the circle was complete. And in the eyes of all those gathered that day shone a profound certainty: the most beautiful revolutions sometimes begin with a simple gesture of kindness.